Well, welcome everyone to another night of church history. Let's say a quick prayer and get started. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for the blessings that you are giving each one of us, especially as those blessings pertain to this class. I just thank you for the work that you have motivated each person to put into this class. And I just thank you so much for just being a part of everything that's happening. I pray that you will be with us tonight, that you will plant seeds, that you will make connections, and Lord, that you will just help us understand a little bit more about you. We ask it all in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so tonight I want to try to tie a few things together. So I gave you a total of 3 handouts, but there's 2 pieces of paper. So the first handout that I just want you to glance at is this black and white handout. The only reason I want you to see it, it's dating back you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, it says it's the Roman Empire in 117 AD. It doesn't really matter. The date is not that important. I just want you to see how far to the west and how far to the east and the north and the south, just how big the empire is at that time. It doesn't get a whole lot bigger than this, even into the years that we're going to be going, because we're going to be more in the 250s and 300s and that area tonight. But I just want you to have an idea of the vastness of the empire, and with the understanding that at this time there is one emperor to rule the entire empire. And we've talked a little bit about, kind of touched on this before, where as far as it pertains to Christianity, as Christianity began to grow and spread, they were sort of an irritant to the general population, and people didn't like that, that they were, I wish the camera could see the room. We have dancers. It's fantastic. No, it's okay. It's okay. I just like how the way this side of the room just sort of erupted into dance. That was pretty good. Anyway, so as Christianity started to kind of grow and spread and kind of be a little irritant here and there, the empire as a whole was still sort of brushing it off for whatever reason. Sometimes it was because they thought it was tied, the empire thought it was tied to Judaism, and Judaism was allowed. Sometimes it was because they were so small that the empire didn't have time to, it's sort of like a drop in the ocean, didn't really have time to worry about it too much, right? But I just want you to have in mind the capacity or the vastness of the empire as we start our lecture tonight, because it's going to play an important part into the next steps that are going to be happening. All right, so let's go to 248 AD. And again, some of these dates are going to be important and some of them are not. Most of them are a timeline so that you can stay straight, as far as where we are in time. Whenever the date is important, I'll make sure to tell you so that you can, only memorize the things or remember the things that I'm going to test you over. All right. So in 248, Rome, the empire, had what was called a millennial foundation celebration. Okay? It was the millennium from the conception of the empire, and the entire empire was in a very celebratory state at this point. There was a man at this time, his name was General Decius. We've already talked about him a little bit, but we're gonna lay some foundation. So it's the same Decius that we've talked about previously. There's this man, General Decius, and he was observing lots of things. But as far as this class is concerned, he's kind of watching Christianity as it's growing and spreading and seeing what's happening. And there are a couple things that he notices. So when he's looking at the Christians, he sees that they do not do a couple of things. They do not participate in the celebration, the millennial, the big grand poobah of all celebrations at the time, they're not participating in that. And he also, as a general, he was noticing that they do not join the army. Now, that's not 100%. That's not to say that there were no Christians ever in the Roman army. But in general, people who did not want to join the army sometimes would lay claim to Christianity in order as a justification for not joining the army. And he was taking note that, well, there's another one claiming Christianity. There's another one claiming Christianity. He was just kind of making notes in his head. General Decius was a hardcore Roman. He was all about the Roman gods and the Roman traditions and everything Roman, right? So what he did notice, what he kind of saw, and I'm going to put this in parentheses because whenever I tell you what we're talking about, you'll see why it's like, yeah, this is what he saw. What he saw them doing, okay, he saw them as being atheistic. He thought they were cannibals. Oops. He thought they were sexual deviants. And they refused to worship, or refused emperor worship. Okay? So these were on your test, so that's why, I mean, he saw it, but really, he saw it the same way that all the Romans saw it. It's not necessarily that it was true, but it was the perception of Christianity at the time, right? All right. So at this point in the game, Christianity is still fairly tolerated, okay? Because right now he's just General Decius, and he's just doing his job in the army. Well, he ends up overthrowing the Emperor Philip. It doesn't matter that you know who he is, but at least not at this point. Emperor Philip was definitely a sympathetic person towards Christianity. Whenever General Decius overthrew Philip and usurped the throne and became emperor, Decius, and we already talked about him a little bit. This is whenever he started a very serious and severe persecution of Christians. He's the one who instated the libellus. He was just brutal, and he was in power with intense persecution for about 2 years. But we talked about him, so you already kind of know about him. Now, he is the emperor for only 2 years, 249 to 251, okay? Those are both very intense years of persecution for Christians. At the same time that all this is going on, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the Roman government, okay? So it's not because of Emperor Decius that this is happening. He's just living in a time when this is happening, okay? So first of all, the economy in Rome was a total mess. There was a lot of taxing, a lot of inflation. Things were expensive. They were hard to come by. People were starving. Not necessarily, just pockets across the empire. For the most powerful empire in the world, there was a lot of economical upheaval, okay? Secondly, at this time, the government itself was in chaos. And what I mean by that is, for example, at this time, or around this time, there were 18 emperors over a span of 50 years. That is a lot of turnover. If you can imagine having 18 jobs in 50 years or whatever, 18 emperors in 50 years. And what was happening was, just like what happened with Decius, they would come, somebody would attack the current office, overthrow it, kill the emperor, kill all the emperor's family, so there was no threat to the title or to the position, and then they would just become the emperor. And so there was constant turnover because there was constant assassination and targeting and attacks, and just the government was just in trouble in that way. The third thing that was happening was the empire itself was under attack. Now these are small pockets of people groups that are coming in from the outside and attacking the borders of the empire. The book talked about two of them. There were the Goths, sort of coming out of the Spain area, and then the Persians, who were coming more out of the eastern part of the country or the area. So just imagine General Decius. He's been serving in the army. He's been watching everything that's going on. He's now got the empire under his belt. The economy is bad. The government, he already knows there's a target on his back. There's all of these people groups that are attacking from the outside. And so he's got a lot of chaos and a lot of settling to do, right? And the Christians are sort of, he was very much of the opinion that part of the reason that all of this is happening over all of these years is because Christians were not subjecting themselves to the Roman gods, that they were upsetting they're just upsetting everything. And so part of his belief system, and it was, many of the Romans felt this way, part of his belief system was that these atheistic, sexually deviant, cannibalistic people that refused to even be loyal to the empire, and they refused to, be loyal to the gods of the empire. Look at the mess we're in because we can't control the people that are living in our space. So, and he's watching how they don't seem to be loyal to the empire. They're not willing to fight for the empire. So he's got a lot of rage. Like, he's got a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and he's got a pretty good target on the Christians, which is why these 2 years, or we presume, this is why these 2 years are so intensely against the Christians. All right. So, as you remember, or I hope you remember, since you did so well on your tests, I'm assuming you remember. While all of this is going on, or actually after these 2 years of persecution, remember what happened with the church. During the persecution, whenever the soldiers are walking around, where's your libellus? Oh, no problem. Here's a portable altar. Let's pinch the incense, whatever, right? So while the empire was being scoured, 3 groups of people were being formed as far as the church is concerned. 3 different groups of people coming from the church. One were the martyrs. Those were the people who refused to deny Christ, but they died. Okay? The confessors also refused to deny Christ, but most endured some sort of torture. I mean, they would put eyes out, they'd chop hands off, they burn, they just did really, awful things. But those people were called the confessors, and they did not deny Christ, but they suffered some sort of torture, whatever that may be. It could be minor or it could be very serious. And then the third group were these lapsed, where many of them began by staying strong, but under the threat, either the threat of some sort of torture, or actually going through some torture and then saying, oh, forget this. They decide to take the libellus, and they basically commit this apostasy, right? And they're out of the church. There was also another sort of subgroup of the lapsed where they never actually pinched the incense, but they got a hold of a libellus somehow. They, bought it off the black market, the Roman black market, or, whatever. But still, they were skirting the issue, okay? Skirting, are you a Christian or are you not? Well, after the 2 years, all these people start wanting to get back into the church. Well, the martyrs don't have anything to worry about. The confessors, they don't have anything to worry about. They're, they never denied Christ, so they're good. But then you have these lapsed coming in. And, they could be telling stories like, they tortured my child and killed them in front of me, and I lost my will to live myself, and I just said whatever I had to, and I just, whatever. And some people just denied right off the bat, whatever your story was, right? But these lapsed, they created an issue for the church. And remember, we talked about those 3 men, and we're not going to talk about Novatus too much, but those 2 in particular men who were fighting, or they were in a doctrinal dispute about how to handle the lapsed, the group of the people, right? So Cyprian was down in Carthage, and he did not want, he just didn't think that anybody should have anything to do with letting anybody back in. If you are apostate, you're an apostate. That's it, right? And then you have Novatus up in Rome, yes, and he's up in Rome, and he's saying, well, if they can prove that they are really sorry, basically. Like, the greater the crime, the more you have to do to prove that you are sorry about it. It began to make a system of I can't think of the word.
Penance?
Yes, it is penance, but it is I'm sorry. All right. Let's move on. So I'll think of the word and it'll pop out in the middle of the lecture, and only you people will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, it was degreed. The lesser the sin, the lesser this travesty, the less you had to pay. The greater the sin, linear. It was a linear system that they set up. So if you just denied Christ right off the bat, you had a lot to answer for, and you had a lot of what became known as penance before the church would let you back in, right? If you were an apostate, if you actually just denied Christ right off the bat, the book talked about this a little bit, if the church would not allow you back into fellowship, but then upon your deathbed would allow you back into the church in order to ensure your salvation, but they wouldn't allow you to actually participate in anything with the church. So there was all this leveling going on. Okay, so the point is, with these 2 men in particular, they really fought with each other for about 7 years. I mean, this doctrinal dispute went back and forth for a really, really long time. I mean, probably longer than anybody really expected it to. And they just fought with each other. All right, so all of that is happening. Rome is still in this position. Those groups are created, and you've got Cyprian and Novatian. They're sort of fighting with each other, right? Okay. So, along comes another emperor. And we're just walking through some history to get to the main point here. We're just trying to figure out how we're getting where we're going. All right. So, in 258, there was an emperor, and his name was Valerian. Valerian comes into power, and as part of what he's needing to deal with, on top of all the economy and all that stuff, he's got these 2 bishops who are fighting with each other and causing a stir. They're causing a ruckus, right? Well, whenever he comes into power, one of the things he does is he just wipes out all the leadership of the church across the empire. He kills them all. He just gets rid of them. He's like, this is ridiculous. So all these guys die about the same time. And Valerian's just like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this, kabam. And he gets rid of it, right? All right. The persecution after he does this, that is sort of his small contribution to Christian persecution. After that, it sort of settles down. There's not really any government, let's go get the Christians, because they've basically cut the head off the snake, on some level. But what's happened, it's interesting. Little churches are still popping up all over the empire, if you want to call it that, little groups of people. And interestingly enough, the idea of penance, or this idea of this if you do this, then you're forgiven sort of idea was very strong in a lot of those churches that were popping up all over the empire. So even though, so to speak, the head of the snake had been cut off, the doctrine or the theology or the viewpoint of how we should handle things continued to carry on. And persecution continued to happen too. It just wasn't so widespread and wasn't so intense. So even though there wasn't like Roman government persecution happening across the empire, there was still pockets, and people still fell into these groups. They were being killed for Christ. They were being tortured for Christ. They were denying Christ. So you still had these groups forming, and what do we do with them? And so these little pockets all over the empire were starting to form under the influence of Cyprian, right? So it's interesting. All right. So now about 26 years later, there is a man. This is 284. His name is General Diocletian. Okay, so we're about 25 years later, and those attacks are still coming from the outside. The economy is not much better. I mean, things are pretty much the same. General Diocletian does something remarkable. He ends up being the person who defeats the Goths and the Persians. So those attacks that have been going on for all these years, he is the war hero who is basically given credit, is responsible for fending off all those attacks and stopping those attacks. So he becomes, very celebrated, and he's sort of the man of the Roman Empire. As soon as this happens, he becomes emperor, Diocletian. But he doesn't usurp the throne to get it. He is given basically as much as you can be, voted into the Roman Empire. That was basically what happened. He was so adored and so appreciated and so loved because of his military savvy that it was just almost a natural consequence that he became the emperor. Now, he was an incredible statesman. He was really, really smart and really good at negotiating politically. And so one of the things that he knew, so again, we have this empire that's kind of still infrastructurally crumbling, right? And he's got to figure out how to stabilize the empire. And it's interesting because it's a biblical concept. He knows that if you are divided against yourself, you're going to fall, right? And so he comes up with a plan. He says, okay, and from looking at the map we looked at earlier, he's got this huge amount of land, give or take, because this is a couple, 100 years later or whatever. But he's got this huge mass of land, and he's one person, and he's got to police everything and keep everything under control, blah, 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 right? And he says, it's just too much for one person. So he does something very interesting. He does a double whammy. He decides to split the empire and have more than one emperor running the empire, and he sets it up in such a way that there is a succession plan so that people are, if you are the person who's next in line to be emperor, you are part of what is fighting off those outside attacks, because you're in line for the position. So you are interested in keeping all these people that want to usurp the authority. You want to keep them down, right? And as the emperor, you've got somebody who is really guarding and watching your back on some level, right? So he set up this system that not only spread out the power so that, it's a little bit more attainable to actually rule the empire, but he set it up in such a way that all of the killing and the target and the this and the that sort of went away. It's very interesting. So let's look at what he did. This is important. All right. Okay, he sets up what is known as a tetrarchy. Okay, so you're going to have, let's do it up here. You're going to have the western part of the empire, and you're going to have the eastern part of the empire. Okay? And if you if you look at the other map that I gave you, this one that's red and green, you're going to see that this is basically this is a snapshot of the empire under Diocletian. We're going to go further than what this map shows, but it's just something to look at so that you understand what I mean by west and east. You can see how it's divided. All right, so what he decided to do was he was going to have, for each half of the empire, he was going to have an emperor, and then he was going to have a Caesar. Okay, so the emperor calls the shots, and the Caesar is his right-hand man, right? Okay. So, Diocletian is the emperor of the East, okay? His Caesar's name is Galerius. In the West, he sets up an emperor named Maximian. And under him, his Caesar is Constantius Calorus, okay? So, from 284 to 305, that is the empire setup. Now, when he set this up, these four men made an agreement, okay? In 305, Maximian and Diocletian would abdicate their authority, and they would abdicate it to their respective Caesar. That Caesar would move up into the position of emperor, and a new Caesar would be put in their place for a period of time, at which there would be another abdication, and so that's how the government would work from that point forward, right? So, let me talk a little bit about, I wonder if one of these other colors will work. It'll be more dramatic. All right, so let's talk about Constantius Calorus. You need to have a little bit of background because this is the intrigue. This is the sort of drama or soap opera part of our evening. So, Constantius Calorus, he ended up marrying a woman named Helena. She was a barmaid, okay? This was before he was Caesar. He married a woman named Helena, who was a barmaid, met her in a bar, whatever, married her, and they had a son named Constantine. Okay? So they're just out there living their lives, doing their thing. And then Diocletian sets up his tetrarchy. His four-person empire, okay? Well, whenever he becomes Caesar, when Constantius Calorus becomes Caesar, as these things happen, they said, you cannot have a barmaid for a wife. That is uncouth. We don't do that in the Roman government, right? So Helena and Constantine are shipped off, and they go to Britain. And that's where they live. While they're in Britain, Helena, she becomes a Christian. Okay? All right. Well, you can imagine that Constantius Calorus was not super excited about losing this woman that he very obviously loved. So he's given a wife. Okay? His wife's name, his new wife, his second wife, her name is, you don't have to remember this, Flavia Maximana Theodora. Wow, that's a terrible color. You can't see it at all. I'll go back to my blue. Now, it just so happens that Miss Theodora has a dad. Her dad is Maximian. Okay? So now you've got the emperor's daughter married to the Caesar. Okay? So we're forming some tight bonds, right? All right. So the handout that I pointed out, that's basically the snapshot. That's what you're looking at right now. Okay? All right. In 305, Diocletian and Maximian honor their commitment and they abdicate their authority. And in 305, Constantius Calorus becomes the emperor, and Galerius becomes the emperor. Okay? So now, all right, so we know Constantius Calorus is the emperor. His Caesar is now Constantine, because that is his son, who doesn't even live he's living off in Britain. He's not even living with him, right? But Constantine is given that title. Not living there, not actually doing much, but he's got the title. Over here, Galerius, becomes the emperor, thank you. And his Caesar, his name is Maxentius. Just to make sure that these guys are a little bit confusing, because their names sound similar. So now Galerius is in the east, Constantius Calorus is in the west, and they've got their two Caesars. And just as a little side note, this guy right here, it's his son. So, Mr. Maximian, he's getting his family and keeping them firmly entrenched in the empire. Okay? That's just a side note. That's just for intrigue. All right. That's just for the Jerry Springer show. That's right. All right. So all of this change happened in 305. Okay? Unfortunately, in 306, Constantius Calorus dies. So Constantine becomes the emperor in 306. Okay, so now he's still in Britain, still doing his business, and he's kind of running things from the outside. And I would imagine that it's a little bit of a scandal, right? But, All right. Now, while all this is happening, let's talk a little bit about Galerius. I have something I want to read about him, because Galerius is a very serious hater of the Christians. He begins a very serious persecution on his side of the empire. The eastern part has a very serious Christian persecution problem. Meanwhile, the western side that Constantine is running, remember, his mom is a Christian. So he's completely tolerant of, there's not a lot of persecution happening in the West, okay? Galerius, he follows Diocletian's first couple of years. Diocletian was pretty hard on Christians for a bit. The book talks a little bit about that. I won't get into it too much because you will have read about, you've already read about it. But he has a very serious issue with the Christians. So he goes on a strong persecution against Christians at this time. Now, Galerius, he ended up dying in 311. Okay, so he dies in 311. But I want to talk about his death just a little. Yes?
So the persecution of Christians is only in their domain?
Correct. For the most part, yes. Yeah, because Constantine is not enforcing anything, and he is. That's the reason. So, in 311, Galerius dies. Galerius dies a horrible, awful death. If you are at all into whatever, like crime shows or how things happen or whatever, Galerius is a good sort of disgusting thing to look at and kind of read about his life. And you get some variety. Like if you'll look at several sources, you'll get a little bit of variety. But this is the gist. Okay. So as people have looked back on Galerius, people now try to figure out what happened to people then and why they died the way they did, medically speaking, trying to figure out, the mysteries of things. And what most people think is that Galerius probably had diabetes. And he had a lifestyle that also allowed him to very likely have some sort of venereal disease. Okay? So it's assumed that the reason he died the way that he did is because he had a venereal disease that he was more vulnerable to or unable to fight against the way a normal person would because of his diabetes. Who knows? Just throwing it out there. But so he acquired this venereal disease. It spread up into his gut. It opened up internally, and he began to have almost an internal gangrene happening. He had maggots that were a problem with him, and there were at this time they used things like leeches and maggots and things like that medicinally to help clean necrotic tissue that had died off or whatever. That was not what was happening with him. His was just because things were rotting, and that's what happens whenever you have open sores and flies around. So he was in a very, very bad way. It was very painful, and he was very noxious smelling. Like, he smelled awful. And so it's said in a lot of the things that I read that there were doctors that were unable to enter the room, or physicians that were unable to enter the room because the smell was so bad, so he'd have them killed. There were physicians who were killed because they couldn't fix him. It's also, I only read this in a couple places, so take it for what it's worth, but it's also been said in a couple places that you could actually smell him from outside his castle walls or his domain walls, right? So it was a slow and terrible sort of rotting from the inside kind of death.
Did he have family?
Well, yes, but he wasn't really a family man. So it not in the sense that you're thinking. Anyway, so he had his entire life been persecuting Christians, right? Just going after them as hard as he can. A week before he died, he issues an edict. And it is an edict that says that the persecution against Christians has to stop. And in this edict, he makes several statements, but in this edict, one of the things he says is, it is the duty of Christians to pray to their God for my welfare. So basically the guy, he knew he was on his deathbed. He knew it was just about over. And so he thought, well, I don't really have time to fight against this God that I don't even believe in or whatever. We're going to stop persecuting. And now all of you guys are required to pray to your God to heal me. Right? So he kind of got a little bit flippy at the end. But anyway, that's what happened. He spent his whole life mocking and persecuting. But then at the end, whenever, the rubber was meeting the road, so to speak, he was like, well, maybe you could go ahead and pray for me. That'd be great. Yeah, get your God to heal me, that kind of thing. So anyway, he died a terrible, terrible death. But that's what he did. That's the way it goes. So now, Maxentius in 311 becomes the emperor, right? All right, so this is what happens. Maxentius becomes the emperor. He immediately gets his people together, and he starts marching to the west. and he's going after Constantine. He's gonna go all the way across the empire, and he's gonna take the empire and be the sole emperor. That's the thought. So he takes his people as soon as he can, and he heads off to go against Constantine. Well, Constantine finds out what's happening, and remember, he's over here in Britain. Well, he starts marching down toward Rome. And that's where they meet. In this, yes. So on this same handout, this little corner shot right here, it shows where, well, you can look up here to see where Rome is on the big picture, but then down here, you can see where Rome is to kind of have some perspective. There is a small river that's coming up from north of Rome called the Tiber River. That's where this next scene is going to happen. So let me give you some stats. All right. Maxentius's army has almost 200,000 foot soldiers. Constantine's army has about 78,000 foot soldiers. Okay? Much, much smaller fighting regime. So these two armies, and I actually don't really understand how this works because I've never really read up a whole lot on, like, when you read about the Civil War and you read about how the British army would beat the drums and march in line and enter very, royally into the area, and then the fighting would start. And I always thought, well, they're sort of saying, here I am, I don't know. There was just so much protocol that was being followed during the Civil War, at least as far as the British were concerned or the English were concerned. There must have been some sort of protocol going on, something, because these guys basically met in this area of the Tiber River, and the next day they were going to fight, right? Whatever. So the night before this big epic battle is supposed to happen, Constantine, now you're going to read, if you decide to pursue this and look into this further, there's different accounts all over the place about what happened. Some people say it was a dream. Some people say it was a vision. Some people say he was completely awake and lucid and he just had a thought, whatever. But Constantine apparently had some sort of something, a dream, a message, a vision, whatever, where he was given the indication that the God of the Christians is who he needs to depend on. Okay? So, and actually, I think there's a phrase, I think it was with this sign conquer, or in this sign conquer, something like that, and it was the cross. So what he did was he had his 78,000 guys, and he says, all right, we're going to put this symbol on everything. We're going to put it on our shields. We're going to put it on the horses. We're going to put it on our, armor, whatever it is they were dressed in. We are going to deck ourselves out and represent the God of the Christians, and he is going to fight for us. It does not look good, right? They're basically going to get stomped is what's going to happen. That's a lot of difference. Oh yeah. So he gets his people together and he says, we are going to war with the God of the Christians behind us. So the next day the battle starts, and it's very interesting. So there was a bridge that apparently was cut, and they actually say that Maxentius was the one that cut the bridge. I don't know. You read about that and there's all kinds of accounts, but it's interesting. If you Google Milvian Bridge, Constantine, Maxentius, whatever, and you hit images and you look at the artwork from, this representing that time, it's very interesting. There was a bridge across this river that was made of boats. Yeah, it's very strange. A bridge of boats. I don't know where that comes from, why it was there, but it was there. And if you look at those images, you can see depictions of how that boat bridge would have looked. Well, what ended up happening was Maxentius's men and their horses and everything like that stormed across this bridge, and boats do like this, and they were heavy. They were heavily armored and heavily armed, plus the horses and the men. They went across this bridge, and the whole thing just collapsed, and most of his army drowned in the river. Constantius totally won that battle. Maxentius even died in the river. So the battle was sort of fought in the river by the boats, turning over, sinking, falling apart, doing all this stuff. It's crazy. Well, so Constantine, and so this battle, this is important. I am going to test you on this. So this battle took place at the Milvian Bridge. And that's going to be on the test, where this battle took place. This happened in 312. That's important, okay, this battle. The reason it's important is because Constantine becomes, for all intents and purposes, the sole emperor of Rome in 312. Okay, so now, does everybody have this? Can I erase it? Okay. Okay. You're good? Okay. All right. So we got to talk a little bit about, just mentioning, because it's going to come into play in a little bit. So he is the emperor. He gives, so he continues to have the empire split into the east and the west portions. Okay, sorry. It's a little harder to get off than I expected. He keeps the empire split. So basically, he takes the western portion and he gives the eastern portion to his brother-in-law. Okay? This guy's name is Licinius, and I just want to make sure I spell it right. Licinus. Okay, so, and this is Constantine's brother-in-law, okay? So he basically says, all right, Licinius, you take the eastern half, and I'm going to stay in the western half, and we're just going to rule, right? All right. Well, of course, as these things go, it didn't last. It didn't last for very long. So let me go back for just a second. We'll come back to Licinius in a minute. Okay, so let's just write down the important things again. So 312, this Milvian Bridge battle happens, and Constantine is the winner, right? In 313 AD, this is also important, he delivers an edict. This is called, Constantine does, the Edict of Milan. And Milan is just a city, but the Edict of Milan. In this edict, Constantine declares Christianity as legal. So now Christianity is accepted and expected to be accepted as a legal religion of the Roman Empire. And actually, as it turns out, it becomes the legal religion of the Roman Empire. Okay, so he wins his war, or his battle. He gives all the credit to the God of the Christians, and within a year, puts out this edict. Now, all that sounds really awesome, right? So now Christianity is legal, and we're all doing really well, and everybody's happy. So this is one of those things that is a little bit illogical, but hopefully I can explain it in a way that will make sense. So first of all, there are lots of opinions out there about whether or not Constantine himself was even a Christian. There are definitely lots of material that you can find where absolutely he was a Christian. His mom, this, that, the Edict of Milan, blah, 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 all this evidence. But on the other side, there's lots of argument against him being a true Christian because of the way he lived his life. He was still, he would still have people killed if they were having issues. He was not necessarily sexually moral all the time. He had his vices and his issues. Okay, so as Christianity became legal in the empire, all of these people, especially in the East, where Galerius had such a stronger persecution, at least as compared to the West, all of a sudden, all these people who were hiding and fearful, couldn't get a job, couldn't put food on their table, whatever, all of a sudden, everything changed. And now, if you want a government position, you probably ought to be a Christian. If you want a good job, probably ought to be a Christian. Everything changed. So when that happened, everybody became a Christian. The pagans, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Sure, I'm a Christian. It was almost like the roles completely reversed, right? So now, instead of people running away and trying to preserve their lives by maybe not necessarily denying Christ, but just not showing it as a big fanfare, now all of a sudden you want everyone to know you're a Christian, because that's how you're going to find a good husband for your daughter, you're going to get a good job, you're going to have good retirement, blah, 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 right? Because of that, this is a term, the secularization of the church happened as a product of the Edict of Milan. When Christianity became legal, everyone came flooding into the church. Everyone claimed Christianity. Everyone. And it didn't matter if they really were a Christian or not, because they weren't claiming Christianity because of Jesus. They were claiming Christianity so that they could have a job or a position or that person's daughter in marriage or, whatever, right? So in times of intense persecution in the church, as we've already seen, we've talked about pockets of intense persecution. In those times, the church tends to grow, it spreads, it grows really strong, and it's like rock solid. Whenever there is no persecution, for example, after this edict was given, and people started flooding in claiming Christianity, when there's no persecution and it's easy to be a Christian, the church becomes very watered down. The doctrines become watered down. There's lots of compromise. There's corruption. There can be corruption even whenever there's persecution happening. But if you're being persecuted, you're less concerned about whether or not there's somebody, no one's even trying to bribe you at that point, right? So this secularization of the church that resulted from Constantine's global Christianity is legal watered down the church and really weakened it. Made it doctrinally unstable, okay? All right. Now, all of this is happening. So, in Alexandria, Egypt, which we talked about, that intellectual center, right? In Alexandria, Egypt, there was a bishop who was giving a sermon. It doesn't matter what his name is. I think I wrote it down. Alexander. Bishop Alexander is giving a sermon or a teaching, and he's talking about the Trinity. As he's speaking, one of the elders begins to sort of hackle him, sort of debate him in public as he's giving his talk. And this man's name is Arius. So the traditional Trinity doctrine is it's one God in three persons, right? What Arius said, and this is important, what Arius said was that God the Father and God the Son, two totally separate people. Or, not one God and two people, totally separate entities. He said that God the Father is eternal, always has been, but God the Son is not. God the Son was created by God the Father. And then you can get into all kinds of, he created this world and then, wound it up and let it go, blah, 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 made mistakes because he was less than an eternal God. There's just all this, you can find all kinds of stuff about why things happen the way they do. But the point is that God the Son, so Jesus, is not eternal and he is a created being. That was the argument that Arius was putting forth to this bishop, Alexander. Well, Alexander is like, you are crazy. That is so totally not the truth, right? Well, Arius kind of started something. He had some people who agreed with his point of view, and this internal church struggle began. Okay? And it all centered around, who is Jesus? Is he an eternal God? Is he a Trinity, a single God, three persons, or is he a created being who sort of messed up all this creation that he made that we're now, trying to live through, right? Well, so all of this is going on and it's brewing. And as time is going on, there's, more people are joining Arius' side. And, the church is like, I can't believe you're listening to this guy. He's so crazy. Don't do it. Don't do it. But all of this is brewing. Okay. Well, while all that's brewing, Licinius, he and Constantine are having issues. And they're not getting along. And they're starting to sort of, I don't know, what is it, like breast bump each other from afar. They're, well, what? They're kind of doing this thing. So that's right. It's the original East Side, West Side problem. So Licinius, his stronghold or his headquarters was in a city called Byzantium. Oh, I cannot spell. I am so sorry. Byzan. Tium. Okay. His stronghold is in a city called Byzantium. Okay. Constantine basically gets fed up and is done playing around and wipes Licinius out. Like totally just forget that. So this is in 324. So not too long after. We haven't gone very long here. 10 years, 11 years or so. This battle, you don't have to know this. It's just for, although it'd be a good bonus question if I wanted to ask it.
324, he wipes out the east side.
Yes, that's right. The east side is gone. And it's called the Battle of something. And I wrote it down. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the battle.
E all the way up to the right. It makes it west side.
Right. Oh, here it is. It is right in front of me. Okay, this is called the Battle of Chrysopolis. Okay, doesn't matter. I'm not gonna test you on that. Although it would be an awesome bonus question if I wanted to put it on there. Anyway, so this battle happens and Licinius gets wiped out. Okay, Constantine decides to go into this city that was his stronghold and throw a big celebratory party, because now Constantine truly is the only power, the ultimate authority in Rome. There is not another emperor now. No sharing. So Constantine goes into Byzantium after he's wiped out Licinius, and he throws this big celebration, right? And he kind of, the way that it reads, it's kind of like thumbing, because it's a stronghold, blah, blah. Anyway, so he goes in, throws this big party, and he does a couple things. He changes the city name to Constantinople. Okay, he changes the name officially from Byzantium to Constantinople. And more interestingly, this is a key thing, he moves the political center, which also implies the religious center, to Constantinople. From Rome, where it has been, because what's the name of this empire? The Roman Empire. So from the beginning, Rome has been sort of the center point of the empire. That's where the emperor goes to church. That's where the biggest church is. That's where I keep saying grandpoopa. I watched way too much Happy Days in my youth. But the big bishop or the big religious authority was in Rome. Whenever this happened and he moved the religious center from Rome to Constantinople, the religious went with it. All of a sudden, this little pastor or this little bishop or whatever who is in Byzantium, he wakes up the next day and he is the religious authority over the Roman Empire. Hello. And that same morning, the pastor in Rome woke up and he's just the pastor in Rome. Not good. Not good. Not good at all. So this is a very interesting and sort of groundbreaking move. All right. So now Constantine, his goal above everything else, all he wants to do is unite the entire empire. He wants to put it back where it was. The economy is better, blah, blah, blah. All these things are so much better. Now we're going to become one, and we're not going to be East and West anymore. We're going to be one big empire, right? Now, again, we're looking at this through the lens of Christianity. So other things were happening. The way that I'm telling it, it's almost like this is the focal point of everything, but for our purposes, it is. So remember I was telling you that there was this kerfuffle happening with Arius, right? So here's Constantine celebrating his victory, doing all this business, and he wants to unite the empire. And he says, all right, I'm going to unite the empire, and I'm going to use Christianity, or I'm going to use religion to do that. We're going to reunite the empire using Christianity. Well, as he's trying to get this done, there's all this scuffle going on underneath the surface. Arius this, and what do you mean? What is this? Who is Jesus? Is he a God? Is he eternal? Is he created? Is he this? Is he that? And there's all this intense fighting in the church. Like, people are not having it, right? It's a serious fight. So Constantine says, look, you guys he's counting to 3. I don't know if you guys were here listening to Pastor Khan talking about disciplining kids, and it's like, why do you count to 3? That's basically what Constantine was doing, because he's got this whole empire and he's trying to do this great thing, and all the people are fighting, and he's like, all right, you've got till I count to 3 to get this settled, or I'm going to settle it, right? Of course, that doesn't happen. They're still fighting and whatever. They're still fighting amongst themselves. So Constantine, rather than being a total brute, he doesn't just come in and start wiping people out, which would sort of, at least for what we've talked about, that's how Rome did, just wipe them out and start over again. Constantine didn't do that. He said, all right, this is what I want. Now, and I want you to, if you look at this last map, so I want you to realize where Constantinople is. It's up here in the upper left side of your page. It's got a little, I guess that's supposed to be a church. I don't know. But it's the capital city now, okay? So Constantine says, all right, I'm going to settle this. This is what we're going to do. We are going to have a pastoral conference. We are going to invite every pastor, basically, or bishop, whatever, from every city in the empire, and we're going to all meet up here at my place in Nicaea. And we're going to have a big conference, and we're going to duke it out, and we're going to come to a conclusion, and we're going to stop fighting. Okay? So all of these cities that are already on the Eastern Empire, so you've got, Jerusalem and Antioch and Syria, you've got all those cities. They're like, right on, Constantine, let's do it, baby. And he's paying for everything. He's like, oh, if you don't have the money, I'll send my chariot. I'll pick you up. We just want you to come, right? So he's paying for the whole thing, having it at his house up in Nicaea. I mean, it's sweet, right? So these are like, all right, let's go to the council, right? So all these pastors head up. Some of the pastors in the West are also excited about going. Guess which pastor is not excited? Ding, ding, ding. Rome's not excited. And they're like, ugh, whatever. I don't even know why we're going. This is the center of the empire. It always has been. It always will be. I am the bishop over the empire. So I don't even know. Right? So all these pastors come in. And they all show up in Nicaea. And this is the first ecumenical council. If you look up the term ecumenical council, you'll find that there have been several. This was the first. In 325, Constantine called what is known as the Council of Nicaea. And it's because that's where his summer home was, and that's where they met. So basically at this council, all these bishops got together. Arius showed up, his cohort showed up, and there was a big debate. People giving their sides. And Arius was very heavily outnumbered as far as like just people. But he showed up, he had his debate, he had his people who were backing him up. And at the end of the day, the outcome of that council in regard to Arius was he was declared a heretic. Okay? Okay? He was declared a heretic, and much like, okay, so do you guys remember when we talked about the formation of the Bible and how one of the strong driving forces of what we now call our Bible was attacks from the outside, right? People being apologists, people saying, oh no, that is not the doctrine. That is not the doctrine of the church. This is the doctrine of the church, right? And they said, man, we got to do something about Montanus. We got to do something about Marcion and all these other people who are messing around with our doctrine. And so they pulled together and said, this is our doctrine. This is what we live by. This is how we're going to fight, right? So in much the same way, here comes this heretic. Now he's a heretic, and they're like, okay, now what are we going to do? We've declared him a heretic, so how are we going to address his heresy, right? So first of all, the idea that Jesus is not eternal, the idea that he is a created being, that is what is known as the Arian heresy. Important. Okay, the Arian heresy that's sort of coined from all of this debate. The product, I'm sorry?
Arian heresy was Jesus is not.
He was not eternal.
No.
He was created by God the Father. The thing or the document that was created to combat the Arian heresy is what is known as the Nicene Creed. If you have a Catholic background, you probably know it by heart. If you do not, we used to recite it when I was in church. We used to recite it every service. We recited the Creed. So, the Nicene Creed. So let me just read the first few lines of the Creed, and bearing in mind that you understand the center point of the Arian heresy, this is the first few lines of the Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, all that is, seen and unseen. We believe one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, one God, right? Through him all things were made. And then it goes on into, he is our salvation, blah, blah. So the first few lines of the Nicene Creed are a direct rebuttal and apologist statement against Arian heresy. Cool, right? All right. Yeah, yeah. So what's interesting, though, is now, and this is just going to be like a generic sort of throwing it out there thing. I'm not going to give examples. But as the emperors go forward in history, different emperors come up and whatever, depending on their stance, pro-Christian, anti-Christian, whatever, Arius is declared a non-heretic. He's declared a heretic again. It's kind of funny. It just kind of goes with the wind. But this creed, the Arian heresy has never changed, and the creed that was created to combat that has never changed. It does have an alteration later on, but we'll get to that in a little bit when we get to it. So, knowing that the center was moved, Byzantium was renamed to Constantinople, knowing that in 325 the Council of Nicaea met, and Constantine called that council, and it was to combat Arian heresy, and that this creed came out of it, all of that is very, very important. And that is basically not the end of Constantine's story, but is a big part of it. Okay? Well, I think that's it. Let's say a quick prayer, and then we're out. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this evening. We thank you for the time you've given us. I pray that you will help all of this information to just come into place, that it will make sense, that it will just help us understand how your church was created, how it was formed, and how it just kept growing and changing. Lord, we thank you so much for the opportunity, and we just ask that you would cement it in our minds, Lord. Bring it to our minds whenever we need it, Lord. Use us as you will with this information, Lord, that we can just further your name, further your gospel, and just raise your name on high. We love you, and we just thank you so much. In Christ's name, amen.